The winter of 1841 arrived early in the Pennsylvania hills, bringing with it a peculiar stillness that seemed to settle over the newly constructed asylum like a burial shroud. Dr. Ezra Whitmore stood at the tall Gothic windows of the third floor, watching the bare branches of oak trees scratch against the grey sky. The building behind him was magnificent 3 stories of carefully hewn limestone, with soaring arches and pointed windows that caught the fading light like watchful eyes. The Pennsylvania State Hospital for the Insane had been his life's work, a testament to modern medicine and humanitarian ideals. The cornerstone had been laid with ceremony just 2 years prior, and now patients filled the corridors of what locals had begun calling simply the Stone House. Dr. Whitmore had designed every detail himself, from the wide hallways meant to promote tranquil movement to the high ceilings that would allow proper ventilation of the soul. Yet something was terribly wrong. Martha Henley had been the first to notice the pattern. As the head nurse, she kept meticulous records of every patient's condition, noting improvements and setbacks with the dedication of a scholar. But as the months passed, her leather-bound ledger began to tell a story that chilled her to the bone. Where she should have recorded recoveries, she found only deterioration. Where she hoped to document departures to loving families, she instead wrote date after date of death. "Doctor," she said one February morning, her voice barely above a whisper, as she entered his study. "We need to speak about the patients, Doctor." Whitmore looked up from his medical journals, his kind eyes crinkling with concern. At 52, he had devoted his life to healing the troubled mind, believing deeply that madness was not a curse but a condition that could be treated with proper care and modern methods. "What troubles you, Martha?" She placed the ledger on his desk, her hands trembling slightly. "In the 8 months since we opened, we've lost 23 patients. Not one has been discharged as cured." The doctor's face paled. He opened the ledger and began to read the entries. Sarah Brennan, age 28, melancholia, died of consumption. Thomas Wright, age 41, mania, died of fever. Elizabeth Hartwell, age 35, hysteria, died in her sleep. The list continued, page after page of hope extinguished. "But we're using the most advanced treatments," Dr. Whitmore protested, his voice hollow. "The water therapy, the moral treatment, the therapeutic labor. These methods have shown success in other institutions." Martha nodded gravely. "That's what frightens me, Doctor. We're doing everything right. Yet our patients continue to fade away as winter deepened. The deaths continued with a grim regularity. Samuel Davis, a gentle man whose only madness was believing he could speak to birds, passed away on a Tuesday morning. Young Rebecca Mills, who laughed too loudly and too often, died on a Thursday night. The staff began to whisper among themselves, their voices echoing strangely in the stone corridors. Dr. Whitmore threw himself into research, corresponding with colleagues in Philadelphia and Boston, adjusting treatments and personally examining each patient. But for every theory he tested, another soul departed. The beautiful Gothic windows began to feel less like sources of light and more like portals to some darker realm. It was old Henry Caldwell, the groundskeeper, who first spoke the words that others only dared to think. "It's the building itself," he said one evening as he trimmed the oil lamps in the main hallway. "Stone holds memories, Doctor. And this stone, it remembers things best left forgotten." Dr. Whitmore dismissed such superstition, but as the months passed, he began to notice things that medical training could not explain. Patients would wake screaming about voices in the walls. They spoke of cold spots that moved through rooms, like living things. Some claimed to see figures in the windows, not reflections, but faces that watched from within the glass itself. By the end of the first year, 47 patients had died. By the second year, the number had risen to 89. The local newspaper, initially proud of the modern hospital, began to run obituaries with increasing frequency. Families stopped visiting. New patients arrived with fear in their eyes. Dr. Whitmore's hair turned white during the 3rd year. Martha Henley developed a persistent cough that echoed through the halls. The other staff members began to leave, one by one, until only the most dedicated remained. Still, the deaths continued. It was during the 4th year that Dr. Whitmore made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his days. While researching the property's history in the county records, he found a deed from 1798 that mentioned the land's previous use. The limestone quarry that had provided the building stone had been the site of a tragic accident 40 years earlier. A collapse had killed 19 workers. Their bodies never recovered, Entombed forever in the very rock that now formed the hospital's walls, the revelation struck him like a physical blow. He stood in the records office, surrounded by dusty volumes and fading documents, and understood at last why his patients spoke of voices in the stone. The building wasn't just constructed from limestone, it was built from a graveyard. That night, Dr. Whitmore walked the halls of his hospital with new eyes. He touched the walls that had once been his pride and felt the weight of tragedy embedded in every block. The Gothic arches that had seemed so hopeful now appeared to bow under the burden of sorrow. The tall windows no longer welcomed light, but seemed to trap it, just as the stone had trapped the souls of the dead Dante as the 8th year drew to a close. The final count stood at 156 patients lost. Not a single soul had been declared cured and released. The Pennsylvania State Hospital for the Insane was officially closed in the spring of 1849. Its halls emptied of both the living and the dead. Dr. Whitmore spent his remaining years in a small cottage near the abandoned hospital, tending to a garden and writing letters to the families of those who had died. He never practiced medicine again, but he found a different kind of healing in remembering each patient's name, each story, each life that had been entrusted to his care. The stone house still stands today, its Gothic windows dark and empty. Local historians record it as a failed experiment in early psychiatric treatment, a footnote in the evolution of mental health care. But sometimes, on quiet winter evenings when the wind moves through the bare oak trees, people passing by swear they can hear voices echoing from within the stone walls, not the cries of the tormented, but the gentle murmur of souls finally at peace, sharing their stories with anyone willing to listen. The building that was meant to heal became something different, a monument to the truth that some sorrows are too deep for medicine to reach, and some stones too heavy for the living to bear alone.